is a 2010 Toyota FJ Cruiser. It's just a ridiculous thing. In Toyota's boring, normal lineup of cars that people buy without much imagination, you have the regular SUV that everyone buys, the Highlander, and the family minivan that everyone buys, the Sienna, and then the sedans, the Camry and the Corolla, and then you also had this, a weird SUV with 3 windshield wipers. Toyota sold the FJ Cruiser from 2007 to 2014, and they never should have canceled it. And today, I'm going to review this FJ Cruiser and explain why. Now, I've borrowed this FJ Cruiser from a viewer here in Orange County in Southern California named Cam Rackham. He is an artist, he's a painter, and he does cool stuff with stained glass, and you can follow him on Instagram by clicking the link in the description below. Now, a little history on the FJ Cruiser. Back in the 1960s and the 1970s, Toyota's original Land Cruiser was on sale, and it looked like a Jeep, very utilitarian, and the internal Toyota code name for this vehicle was the FJ40. Now, over the years, Toyota Land Cruiser models have gotten more luxurious and larger, and the code names have changed. The current one is called the 200, but enthusiasts still refer to that original Land Cruiser as the FJ40. With that in mind, when Toyota wanted to create a fun off-roader SUV in the 2000s, they channeled the FJ40 Land Cruiser and created the FJ Cruiser. It was surprising. It was a huge departure from everything Toyota was making at the time, boring cars like the Camry and the RAV4 and the Highlander. Now, the FJ Cruiser sold okay, but not well enough to merit a second generation when it went out of production after 8 years on the market. All FJ Cruiser models used a 4-liter V6 with about 250 horsepower and about 280 pound-feet of torque, and you could get it with a 6-speed manual or a 5-speed automatic. And Toyota should bring it back. The FJ Cruiser was canceled after the 2014 model year, and in the 5 years since then, the popularity of the off-roader SUV has absolutely exploded. The Toyota 4Runner has had some of its best sales years ever in the last couple of years, and everybody seems to be interested in off-roaders, the Ford Raptor, Toyota's Tacoma TRD Pro, and many, many others. The FJ Cruiser is a victim of terrible timing. It came out a decade too early, and if it was on sale now, I suspect it would be really popular. This is proven by resale values, as used FJ Cruiser models hold their value tremendously well and sell for ridiculously high prices because of all this recent enormous demand for off-roader SUVs and for the FJ Cruiser specifically in the used market. So today I'm going to find out if it's worth it. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the FJ Cruiser and show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the FJ Cruiser, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the most interesting Toyota models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Alright, we start the quirks and features of the FJ Cruiser with my very favorite quirk of this vehicle and one of my favorite automotive quirks in recent years, and that would be the 3 windshield wipers. Now, when Toyota was designing the FJ Cruiser, the windshield design they came up with was fairly low, but fairly wide, and that meant if you fit 2 windshield wipers on it, you would have a large portion of the surface area that wasn't getting wiped. Now, that's fine. They could have just left it like that, but Toyota didn't want any limitations on visibility, so they solved this problem in my favorite way, by making it quirkier. And that meant 3 windshield wipers to cover the full width of the windshield. So you have 1 on the side, 1 in the middle, and 1 over on the other side. They operate just like normal windshield wipers, but there's 3 of them, which just looks fantastic whether they're on or off, and it kind of sets the tone for the rather quirky nature of this vehicle. Now, interestingly, even though the FJ Cruiser is kind of known for that 3 windshield wiper thing in front, that isn't the only wiper-related quirk for this vehicle. The other one is back here. Now, in front, you have ultra windshield wiper capacity because you have 3 wipers. In back, you have the single smallest wiper you will ever see on any vehicle. It's like they over-wipered in front, and then to compensate for that, you have this tiny little thing back here that's like the size of a note card in order to wipe the entire rear window. They spent all of their windshield wiper engineering budget in the front. And next up, moving on to my second favorite quirk of the FJ Cruiser, that would be right here. You have a light on the back of the mirror that points forward. And when you turn on your headlights, this light comes on too. Now, when I first saw one of these FJ Cruisers on the road, and I saw that years ago, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. You have like a little searchlight, like a police car alley light. Unfortunately, that's not actually what happens. When you turn this on, it is the single dimmest light I have ever seen in any automotive application. And I suspect what happened is that Toyota got hamstrung by regulations. They couldn't put a very bright light on the mirrors, and this is all you got. But it's still a really cool thing to see, and I hope there's some aftermarket kit that allows you to put a really bright light on here for off-roading. And then we move on to the FJ Cruiser's next interesting quirk, and that would be the doors. Now, the original Toyota FJ40 Land Cruiser was a 2-door SUV, and Toyota was trying to tie this into the nostalgia of the original FJ40, but Toyota is not stupid. They know that 2-door SUVs fail. Always. Every single 2-door SUV ever made has eventually been canceled due to poor sales, except the Jeep Wrangler, and even that is like 80% 4-door now. So Toyota needed to add doors, and what they did was they gave you a regular front door, and then you got a half rear door. And as you can see, it's like this on both sides, the left and the right, meaning that you can gain extra access to the back seat on either side, but you do not have a full door to get that access. So it's like an extended cab pickup truck. You have a full door and then a half door, so you can climb into the little back seat. But doing the doors like this created an interesting problem for the FJ Cruiser. You see, by having the 2 doors open together, you end up with a massive hole basically in the front of the vehicle. From the A-pillar all the way to the rear seats, this entire compartment is just open with no support for the roof. So in order to get away with that, they had to put a large support for the roof right behind it, and that's this. And the problem with this panel is it is absolutely massive. Now, it makes this vehicle work. It holds up the roof, everything's fine functionally and structurally, but the issue is it creates a huge blind spot back here. So you have a tiny rear door to access the back seats, and then you have a huge blind spot before you get to the rear window, and that makes it a little bit challenging to drive when you're changing lanes. Next, we move on to the interior of the FJ Cruiser, and I'm going to cover some of the interesting quirks and features in here, and I want to start with the dashboard, which just looks ridiculous compared to most cars. Upright, 90 degrees. Now, some modern Toyota trucks and SUVs also have a similar dashboard design, and that design basically started with the FJ Cruiser. It's supposed to make it look more robust and muscular and capable and able to do anything, but it's a really weird look if you've been in basically any other car. And I really like the fact that no attempt is made to try to tie the lines of the dashboard into the lines of the doors. So many cars have like one unbroken line from the door to the dashboard. Not the FJ Cruiser, it just stops and then the door starts. Now, next we move on to the center in the interior, and specifically the gear lever. And what I want to talk about here is the fact that this gear lever looks insanely like a pepper grinder, or a pepper mill they call it. Look at this thing. I have seen actual pepper grinders that look less like pepper grinders than this gear lever. I almost want to just turn this thing and expect pepper to fall out as I'm shifting between gears. I have no idea why they chose this design, but I truly wonder if they were like inspired buy a pepper grinder that is exactly what it looks like. And next up, here's another interesting quirk of the FJ Cruiser's interior. A lot of cars will have a little storage panel on the top of the dashboard, usually in the center, but in the FJ, that space is taken, so there's a little storage panel above the gauge cluster directly above the steering wheel on the dashboard. You can throw like sunglasses or a wallet in there. I have never seen a storage compartment placed there before, but a quirk of the FJ Cruiser. And another quirk of the FJ Cruiser has to do with the sun visors. Now, when you put the sun visor down, it blocks the sun just like in most normal cars. But the problem with the FJ is that the blocky design makes the windshield so far away from the seats that if you move the sun visor over to the side, it doesn't actually block any sun coming in from the side window. So Toyota has an auxiliary side sun visor in the FJ Cruiser. You can move the front sun visor over, put down the side sun visor, and then you have multiple sun visors to block the sun coming in from the side. And next up, another rather interesting quirk of the FJ Cruiser is the climate control dials, which are in the middle and absolutely huge. Now, you see large climate control dials in some trucks and SUVs because they want you to be able to operate them if you're wearing like gloves and you're working on the job site and you don't want to have to take off your gloves to turn on the climate control. But these are exceptionally massive. They are the largest climate control dials I have ever seen in any vehicle. They're absolutely massive. Forget about gloves. You could operate these with your feet while you're wearing shoes, if that's something. Anyway, they're really just insanely big. Same goes for the hazard lights, the defroster. Absolutely ridiculous. They basically look like child's toys, like the kind of thing you would give to a toddler, and when she turns the dial, it moos like a cow. And next up, moving below the climate controls, we have a series of buttons down here, one of which is marked Subwoofer. Bet you don't have one of those buttons in your car. There is a giant subwoofer mounted in the cargo area, and apparently when you press the subwoofer button, it activates that subwoofer and things really start subwoofing. And next up, moving up from those center buttons, we want to move on to the mirror, which is very useful, not just because it's a mirror, but also because it has printed on it the words "check surroundings for safety." Why, thank you, mirror. I wasn't planning on checking my surroundings for safety, but now I will. Why does it say that on there? I think it's because the mirror includes a backup camera. Shift into reverse and you have the world's worst backup camera that comes on when you do. It's in the mirror, terrible resolution, literally the size of a postage stamp. And I think check surroundings for safety is supposed to remind you that you shouldn't solely rely on the backup camera. You should also look around. Frankly, I think this vehicle would be better off without that backup camera, but it has it anyway. And next up, still in the center, but below the mirror, mounted in the center of the dashboard, you have a couple of gauges. This is why they couldn't put that little storage compartment in the middle. Over on the left, you have a compass. Pretty simple. We all know how compasses work. Now, in the middle, you have the outside temperature gauge, which shows the temperature, obviously, and you can change between Fahrenheit or Celsius by pressing E/M. Now, you're thinking, why isn't it F/C? Well, I'm not sure. It makes no sense to me. And then over on the right, you have a gauge that shows your current like pitch and roll. So when you're off-roading going down a steep incline, you know exactly what your current angle is. You know not to go too far and maybe damage your FJ Cruiser. And next up, another thing I absolutely love about the interior of the FJ Cruiser is that on every possible surface, Toyota has stuck some tough-looking material to emphasize that it's brutish and off-roady. Take a look at the door sill. You have this sort of fake diamond plating, tough-looking plastic. Take a look at the speaker cover on the door. Again, it has this tough pattern to it. Again, on the floor mat, you have this sort of tough, aggressive rubber pattern. And when you lift up the floor mat, on the actual floor of the FJ Cruiser itself, there is yet another tough, angry, aggressive off-roader pattern. Same story when you go into the cargo area. The cargo mat has this cool, tough, robust pattern, and underneath, once again, there is yet another tough off-roadery pattern. And on the back of the rear seats, if you fold them down, there is yet another tough pattern back there that looks really aggressive and macho. Now, it's worth noting that every single one of these tough looking designs is a different design. They're all unique, but they're also all just plastic. None of them are really functional, but they're tough looking plastic. Now, I will say one thing I really do like in the interior is how Toyota has brought the exterior color into the interior. It's this cool tan color that's very popular right now, and you can see that the area around the radio is this tan color, same on the door panel, the tan color, and obviously the middle of the seats has this color as well, which looks pretty cool. And by the way, speaking of the radio, again, you have an absolutely massive knob on here to turn it on and to turn up or down the volume. But the thing I like best about the stereo is this old school Toyota font printed on the top. This is what Toyota's had in like the 60s and 70s before they got all corporate and developed their logo. And it's the same story up front. Toyota could have just put its regular Toyota logo on the front grille, but instead they use this old school Toyota script like the FJ40 used back in the 60s and 70s before Toyota developed its logo. Now, I'm surprised they did this. I've been in these meetings where these executives are like, but it doesn't align with our brand goals. We have to put our logo on it. And whoever got this through and got them to agree to put the old Toyota script on there, I just love it. I think it's a really cool touch. Now, speaking of badging, I want to talk about this badge right here. You can see it says Trail Teams, and that's because this is actually a special version of the FJ Cruiser, the FJ Cruiser Trail Teams Special Edition. Now, every year Toyota made a standard FJ Cruiser, and then they would come out with a different Trail Teams model in a different special color for each model year, and this is the 2010 color. Now, the Trail Teams models were modified just a little bit, and they included better tires for off-roading and different wheels compared to the standard FJ Cruiser, and a couple of other things. One interesting one is this black trim piece mounted on the hood. That is placed there to avoid glare from the sun reflecting off the hood and into your eyes. Now, next, the FJ Cruiser has a back seat, and so, as usual, I will climb into it. It's not particularly difficult since this rear door opens, but it's worth noting that the back seat is not exactly large. It was never really intended for adults of my size, and I barely fit back here with the driver's seat in the position where I would sit. Now, a couple of interesting things about the back seat in this FJ Cruiser. One is the fact that the door windows do not roll down. They are completely fixed in place, so you can't roll them down at all, which kind of adds to the claustrophobic feeling back here. Another interesting thing, the rear door does not have an exterior door handle. The only handle is this little plastic one on the inside. So if you want to open up the rear door from the outside, you do have to reach in, and only then can you grab the latch and open up the back door. Now, it's also worth noting the rear door does not open independently of the front door. You have to have the front door open first, and only then can you open up the rear door. Now, I was curious what exactly would happen if I tried to open the rear door with the front door closed, and the answer is it's just locked. You pull the handle and nothing happens, just like a locked door. Even if the front door is unlocked, the rear door is locked in place, so you can't do it. You have to open the front door first or ask the driver nicely to open it for you, and then you can climb out of the back of the FJ Cruiser. And next, I want to talk about the styling of the Toyota FJ Cruiser. Now, I know there are people out there who believe this is one of the ugliest vehicles on the market. I am not one of those people, but I do remember when it came out like 10 years ago, I remember thinking it was a little weird, maybe a little too weird. I wasn't so sure about it, but I never really thought it was ugly. And actually, over the years, as off-roader type SUVs have become more popular, I've kind of gotten a little bit more into it, frankly. With that said, I do wish Toyota hadn't given us such an angry, macho-looking Jeep. I think it's kind of overstyled, and I would have preferred a simpler off-roader look like the FJ60 Toyota Land Cruiser or the 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser. I think that would have been a really cool thing to sort of modernize with a retro design. And next, moving on to the back of the FJ Cruiser, I want to talk about the cargo area, and specifically, I want want to start with just accessing the cargo area, which is a little bit unconventional. Now, because the FJ Cruiser has this big rear spare tire, I guess Toyota felt that a normal tailgate wouldn't really work because it would just be too heavy, so you have a swing out door. Now the problem with the swing out door is it is quite a cumbersome thing. It's really heavy, and if you're parked on a hill, you may not even really be able to open it. It has a giant hydraulic to help try to keep it open. So to help account for that, Toyota had a second way that you could access the cargo area. If you stuck the key in the keyhole and turned it to the right, the glass would unlock, and then you could open the glass separately. So if you just had some small item that you wanted to throw in and you didn't want to go to the trouble of opening the entire giant tailgate and dealing with all that, you could just open the glass and toss it in. And next up, once we get into the cargo area, a couple of interesting things in here. For one, you can see the cargo area, fairly big for a fairly small SUV, but obviously that comes at the expense of rear seat room. There's also a little net on the inside of the cargo door for smaller items if you don't want them rolling around. And it's also worth noting that that little hydraulic that keeps the cargo area door open actually has a mechanism where you can lock it in place. So if you're worried you're on a hill and you're thinking the cargo door might close on you and like hurt your legs if you're trying to load stuff in, you can lock it and make sure that won't actually happen. And next we move under the hood of the FJ Cruiser. Now when you get under here, you can see the engine, like I mentioned, 4-liter V6, about 250 horsepower and about 280 pound-feet of torque, give or take a little bit depending on the model year. But the main takeaway here is there's no turbocharging, there's no special small displacement. This is an old school engine, very simple, just a 4-liter V6 naturally aspirated, and there's also a lot of space under here where you can do work if you want. This is a simple truck intended to be owned by people who wanted a simple vehicle they could work on themselves. And so those are the quirks and features of the Toyota FJ Cruiser. Now it's time to get this thing out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the FJ Cruiser. My biggest problem with the FJ Cruiser was always the fact that it was an off-roader that was really showing you and trying to be an off-roader. I like the off-roaders that really do the job, but you don't really notice, like the current Toyota Land Cruiser, which is so subtle and yet so capable and so amazing. And most people don't realize that it's so capable because it just kind of blends in. The driving position in this vehicle is just absolutely ridiculous. The windshield is like 4 feet in front of me. I can't, from where I'm sitting, I can't even reach the windshield, which is not the case in most normal cars. And of course it's 90 degrees upright. I noticed there's a rock chip in it. I suspect broken windshields are a common symptom of the FJ Cruiser. Now, one thing worth noting about this car is it was always kind of a bargain new. These started in like the low to mid 20s and they never really lost a ton of value. I mean, it's hard to find one. 10 grand is absolutely a floor. It's very, very difficult to find one under 10,000. Usually it has some sort of serious problem at that price point. But often you'll still see these things in the $15,000 to $20,000 to $25,000 to $30,000 range, even for really nice 14 models with low miles. And it's just incredible how well these have held their value. They are so desired. Really driving it around, it's not all that many surprises. I mean, you kind of get the picture with Toyota SUVs, and just because they put like a crazy looking wrapper on it, it doesn't really change what's underneath, which is it's a Toyota SUV and it drives like one. And on the inside, it really feels a lot more normal than when you look at it from the outside. When you look at it from the outside, it's like, whoa, this thing is bizarre, baby Hummer. When you look at it from here, from the inside, yeah, you got the dashboard, whatever, but you also have a standard Toyota steering wheel, standard Toyota turn signal stroke. The gauges aren't particularly interesting, and it doesn't really drive especially exciting or weird or crazy or even distinct from that many other cars. I actually think they would have done a better job if they had made it a full 4-door and just extended the look. I think it actually would have worked, but for whatever reason, that didn't happen. Really, I like it. It drives well, it feels good, no complaints, but also it doesn't really stand out in any way, but that's okay. It doesn't really have to. It stands out in a lot of other ways. It's like a quirk gold mine in here. But generally speaking, it drives like you'd expect for a Toyota SUV, with maybe a little bit more flair to it. But I think that's fine. And so that's the Toyota FJ Cruiser. This thing is ridiculous. It's bizarre looking, it has a laughable back seat, crazy visibility, and it never really made sense in Toyota's lineup. But it would make sense today, as the go-anywhere, active lifestyle off-roader people would love a new Toyota SUV that shows just how go-anywhere, active lifestyle off-roader they really are. Unfortunately, I strongly suspect Toyota will not be reviving the FJ Cruiser, and so a used one like this is probably as close as we'll come. And with that in mind, time to give the FJ Cruiser a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the FJ Cruiser is fine. I think it's a bit overstyled, and I don't think that anyone would call it gorgeous, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration is fine for what it is, but slow overall, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Handling is about normal for vehicles like this, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Fun factor is high because it's so capable and enjoyable off-road. It would get an extra point if it had a removable roof, which it should have from day one, but even without it, it gets a respectable 7 out of 10. Cool factor is relatively low just because these are common enough that you see them very often. It gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 20 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The FJ Cruiser has all the basics but not many luxuries, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Comfort is average and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is good, the interior is nice enough, but the real benefit is reliability, where this car shines, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is mediocre given the door situation, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, value, and these are great values. They're cool and fun and capable and reliable, but more importantly, they barely depreciate. It gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 29 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 49 out of 100, which places it here against some other cool off-roaders. I like the FJ Cruiser, and it's a fun car, and I really do think Toyota would find even more success if they brought it back now, though I guess that's why we have the 4Runner these days.